My name is Elena Carter, and I still remember the day I buried my husband as if it happened just yesterday. The air was heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. The church smelled of polished wood and lilies, a mix of sorrow and tradition. Friends, family, neighbors, they had all gathered to say goodbye to David, my husband of 7 years. I sat in the front pew, clutching a damp tissue, staring at the closed casket at the center of the aisle. The organ hummed softly, voices whispered around me. And though I tried to keep my breathing steady, every inhale felt like a knife carving its way into my chest. I thought I had prepared myself for this moment. I had replayed the hospital visits, the accident report, the calls with the police, the endless signatures on paperwork that all insisted David was gone. But nothing could prepare me for the feeling of finality that comes when you're staring at a casket, knowing the person inside had once been the love of your life. My hand trembled as I reached into my purse for a tissue. That's when it happened. My phone vibrated. I glanced down, expecting a text from my sister asking if I needed water. But what I saw made my vision blur and my heart stutter. On the screen, a message. From an unknown number. It read, "I'm still alive. Trust no one. David." I froze. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe grief was playing tricks on me. But there it was, in plain letters, glowing from the glass screen. "I'm still alive." I nearly dropped the phone. My throat went dry. I looked around the church, scanning every row. Did anyone else see this? Did anyone send it as some kind of sick joke? But no one was looking at me. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the casket, the pastor, the somber service that continued as though my entire world hadn't just been turned upside down. I clutched the phone to my chest, pulse pounding in my ears. Was it possible? Could David really be alive? Or was this some cruel prank meant to torment me at my weakest moment? The rest of the service passed in a blur. I didn't hear the prayers, the hymns, or the speeches. I only heard the echo of that message repeating in my mind. "I'm still alive. Trust no one." By the time I walked out into the gray afternoon air, I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. The message was still there. Real. Permanent. Not some figment of my grief. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "David, if it's really you, where are you? Why would you say something like this?" I wanted to reply, but my mind froze. What if it wasn't him? What if it was dangerous? What if someone was watching me, waiting for me to respond? So I did nothing. I turned off the phone and buried my face in my hands, tears spilling hot and heavy. The days that followed were a fog of confusion. Every time I tried to tell myself it was impossible, that David was gone, that message would flash in my memory. And then came the doubts. David's death had always felt strange to me. The police report said his car had swerved off a wet road late at night. But when I had gone to see the wreck, the damage didn't seem as severe as what they described. And I remembered, just a week before his accident, David had been acting off. He was quiet at dinner, lost in thought. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd smile faintly and say, "Nothing, Elena. Just work stress." But I had known him too well. Something had been eating at him. And now, with that message, it all started to feel connected. I decided to check David's old laptop, the one I had boxed up after his death. The screen flickered to life, and as I clicked through his emails, one caught my attention. It was from a sender I didn't recognize. Subject line, "We need to talk. It's about your family." The email was brief. Just a single line, "You can't trust the people closest to you." My skin prickled. The timestamp was from 3 days before his accident. I shut the laptop quickly, heart racing. Who had sent that email? And why had David never told me? The next morning, I tried to confide in my sister, Maria. I told her about the message at the funeral, about the strange email. She frowned, placing her coffee cup down. "Elena, I think you're just grieving. You're seeing things that aren't really there. That message, it could have been some scammer. You know how the internet is." I shook my head. "No, Maria. It wasn't random. It was him. I know it was." But before I could show her the message, my phone screen went black and restarted. By the time it powered back on, the text was gone. My eyes widened in disbelief. No, it was here. I swear it was here. Maria placed a hand on mine. Elena, please. You need rest. This grief is breaking you. I pulled my hand away, anger rising in my chest. But beneath the anger was fear. Was I really losing my mind? Or had someone erased that message remotely? That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. My mind churned with questions. If David was alive, why didn't he just come home? Why send a cryptic message instead of showing his face? And why would he say, trust no one? Did he mean Maria? My friends? His family? Or worse, did he mean me? I curled into a ball, tears soaking my pillow. My life was unraveling thread by thread, and I didn't know who to believe anymore. Before we continue, I'd like to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if you're new here, welcome to Revenge with Nick, the channel where betrayal gets exposed and justice always wins. But wait a minute, if you were in Elena's shoes, receiving a text from someone you just buried, what would you do first? Comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Nick, because this story only gets darker. Days later, I found myself at the site of David's so-called accident. The road was narrow, lined with trees, but something about it didn't add up. The report had said the car skidded, lost control, and slammed into a tree. But as I walked along the pavement, I noticed something strange. No skid marks. No shattered glass. No sign of impact. It was as though the crash had never happened. A neighbor watering his plants nearby noticed me staring and walked over. Are you looking for something? I hesitated, then asked, did you hear about the accident here? My husband, David Carter. The man frowned. Accident? Ma'am, I live right there. He pointed to a small house at the corner. If there had been a crash, I would have heard it. There's no way a car wreck happened here without me noticing. My blood ran cold. I thanked him quickly and walked away, my hands shaking. The crash was staged. But why? And by who? The next day, I went to the bank to review David's accounts. Sitting across from a polite but distant manager, I asked about recent transactions. He clicked through his computer and printed a sheet for me. As I read it, my stomach dropped. Large cash withdrawals. Thousands of dollars taken out just days before his death. Withdrawals I never knew about. What were these for? I asked, my voice trembling. The manager shrugged. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I wouldn't know. Only your husband had access to this account. I left the bank with the paper clutched in my hands. My chest tightened with every step. David had been hiding things from me. Big things. But was he hiding them because he was guilty? Or because he was protecting me? As I turned the corner to head home, I noticed something unsettling. A man, standing across the street, watching me. He was dressed in a dark coat, his face partially hidden under a cap. When I slowed my pace, he turned away, pretending to check his phone. My pulse quickened. I kept walking, trying not to look back. But when I passed a coffee shop, I slipped inside, peeking out the window. The man lingered on the corner for a few minutes, then disappeared. I sat in the cafe, pretending to sip a latte, my hands trembling around the cup. I wasn't imagining this. Someone was following me. Someone didn't want me to uncover the truth. Imagine walking alone and realizing a stranger is shadowing your every move. What's the first thing you'd do? Confront them, call the police, or run? Tell me in the comments, and hit subscribe to Revenge with Nick so you don't miss where this chilling story goes next. And that's how it began, the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and the people closest to me. Because that one message at his funeral wasn't just a flicker of hope. It was a warning. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized David was right. I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't shake the image of that man watching me outside the bank. The way he lingered. The way he disappeared the moment I tried to slip away. It confirmed what I already feared. Someone was keeping an eye on me. Someone didn't want me to keep asking questions. But if they thought intimidation would silence me, they were wrong. I was going to find the truth. The next morning, I gathered every scrap of paperwork David had left behind. Bank statements, bills, even crumpled receipts stuffed into drawers. And that's when I noticed something I had overlooked before. A charge at a motel 2 towns over, dated just 3 days before his accident. David had never mentioned staying at a motel. In fact, that day, he had told me he was working late at the office. So why was there a charge to a roadside inn? The thought made my stomach twist. Was he hiding something from me? Another woman? Or was this tied to the message he sent? I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. So I contacted a private investigator. His name was Mr. Lawson, a retired detective with a quiet, no-nonsense demeanor. We met at a diner off the highway. The kind of place where no one asks questions and the coffee is always lukewarm. I slid the motel receipt across the table, along with the bank transactions. I need to know what's going on, I whispered, my hands clenched together. Lawson studied me for a long moment before replying. Mrs. Carter, what you're asking could open doors you can't close again. Are you sure you want me to dig into this? I met his gaze, my throat tight but steady. Yes, I need to know the truth. He nodded slowly, pocketing the papers. Give me a few days. But stay careful. If your husband really is alive, it means someone went to a lot of trouble to make him look dead. And that kind of trouble doesn't come cheap or safe. Those words haunted me as I went back home. The next few days felt endless. I barely slept, barely ate, pacing around the house like a ghost. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow outside the window made me jump. And then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Lawson. Meet me at my office, he said. His voice was low, urgent. I found something you need to see. I drove across town, my palms sweaty on the wheel. Lawson's office was dimly lit, walls lined with old case files. He gestured for me to sit before sliding a USB stick into his computer. The screen flickered, and a grainy surveillance video appeared. I leaned forward, my breath caught in my chest. It was David. He was alive. The footage showed him entering the same motel I had seen on the receipt. His shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around nervously as though he was afraid of being followed. My throat tightened as I watched him approach another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his jaw. David handed him an envelope. What's in the envelope? I whispered. Lawson paused the video. I can't say for sure. But from what I dug up, your husband was involved in uncovering some kind of fraud. Financial records, shady deals. He might have stumbled into something dangerous. I pressed my hand to my chest. And the accident? Lawson leaned back in his chair. Accident? No, Mrs. Carter. If you ask me, it was staged. I felt the room tilt, my breath shallow. Staged. Just like I had feared. That night, as I lay awake in bed, the weight of it all pressed down on me. David was alive, but hiding. Someone powerful wanted him dead. And somehow I was caught in the middle. But the worst part? I didn't know who I could trust anymore. Maria thought I was losing my mind. The police had brushed me off. Even David's parents had seemed oddly detached at the funeral, more focused on insurance papers than on their son's life. Was that what David had meant in his message? Trust no one. The next morning, Lawson called again. I've found something else. Meet me at the same diner. When I arrived, he slid a small recorder across the table. This was hidden in the motel room David stayed in. My contact managed to get it before anyone else did. I picked it up with trembling fingers, pressing play. At first, just static. Then David's voice, shaky, urgent. They know. They know everything. If anything happens to me, Elena, don't trust them. Don't trust Mark. He's not who you think he is. I dropped the recorder, my heart hammering. Mark. David's brother. The man who had stood beside me at the funeral, whispering empty condolences. The man who had offered to help with the insurance paperwork. I felt my stomach lurch. Had it been him all along? At this point, do you believe David is alive, or do you think someone is just using his name to manipulate Elena? Drop your guess in the comments. And if this story has you hooked, hit that like button right now. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Everything inside me screamed to confront Mark immediately, to demand the truth. But Lawson's voice echoed in my memory. Don't open doors you can't close again. So I waited. I watched. And the more I paid attention, the more I noticed the cracks. Mark calling me at odd hours, asking if I'd gone through David's office yet. Mark urging me to let the past rest every time I mentioned unanswered questions. It was subtle, but it was there. And with every slip, I grew more certain. David's warning hadn't been paranoia. It had been prophecy. One evening, Lawson called me with another lead. "Elena, I think it's time you see the bigger picture." We met again in his office, where he spread out photos across the desk. Images of David with Mark and another man I didn't recognize, broad shoulders, cold eyes. "This man," Lawson said, pointing, "is your husband's old business partner. Together with Mark, they've been running a quiet but very profitable fraud scheme. Faked contracts, shell accounts. And from what I can tell, David found out and threatened to expose them." I swallowed hard. "So, they tried to kill him?" Lawson nodded grimly. "Or at least make him disappear. But he must have escaped long enough to send you that message." My heart pounded as I looked at the photos. My brother-in-law, the man I had trusted, smiling beside his partner in crime. It was betrayal at its cruelest form. If you discovered your own family member might be behind a plot like this, would you confront them head-on or gather more proof first? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed to Revenge with Nick, because this story is about to take an even darker turn. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. Everything I thought I knew about my husband's death, about my family, had been shattered. David's words haunted me, "Trust no one." And now I finally understood why. Because the truth was uglier than I could have ever imagined. And the people closest to me, the ones who should have protected me, were the very ones who had tried to destroy him. Mark. My husband's own brother. The man who had hugged me at the funeral, promising to take care of everything. The man who had stood in my kitchen just last week, sipping coffee, smiling as if nothing were wrong. He had been plotting behind my back. He had betrayed his own blood. And worst of all, he had dragged me into the middle of it. I spent the next few days walking on eggshells. Every call from Mark made my skin crawl. Every time his name popped up on my phone, I wanted to throw it across the room. But I couldn't let him know I suspected anything. Not yet. Instead, I played along. "Yes, Mark, I'll sign those papers tomorrow." "No, I haven't gone through David's things yet. I'm just trying to move on." My voice cracked each time I lied, but I forced myself to keep it steady. Because now I knew the stakes. If David had been silenced for discovering their fraud, what would they do to me if they realized I knew too much? One evening, after Maria left my house, I noticed a car parked down the street. Same spot every night. Windows tinted, headlights off. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew. I was being watched. It confirmed what Lawson had warned me. "Stay careful, Elena. They won't hesitate to shut you up too." The breaking point came a week later. Lawson called, his voice urgent. "Elena, I've got something. You need to see this." I rushed to his office, my stomach twisted in knots. On his desk lay a small black recorder, different from the first one. "This," Lawson said, "was obtained through a contact. I won't say how, but it came from a private meeting between Mark and David's old business partner." He pressed play, and what I heard froze the blood in my veins. Mark's voice. Clear as day. "We need to make sure Elena doesn't poke around anymore. She's too close. If she finds David, everything unravels. We can't risk it." The other man's voice followed, deep and gruff. "Then we finish what we started." The recording ended. I sat in stunned silence, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. They were going to kill me. Lawson's jaw tightened. "It's worse than that. This recording proves they orchestrated David's disappearance. And they're desperate enough to come after you." I buried my face in my hands, a sob escaping my throat. Everything I had feared was true. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. For David. For myself. For the truth. Lawson arranged a meeting with the police. At first, the detectives seemed skeptical, but once they heard the recordings, their faces changed. "This is serious," one of them muttered, jotting notes. "Insurance fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. We're talking years in prison if this holds up." They agreed to set up a sting. The plan was simple but dangerous. I would agree to meet Mark at his request. He had been pressuring me to sign some final insurance documents to close things out. But this time, undercover officers would be waiting nearby, ready to move if things went south. I remember the night vividly. Mark asked me to meet at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I walked in, he was already seated, a folder neatly placed on the table. "Elena," he said warmly, standing to kiss my cheek. "You look tired. How are you holding up?" I forced a faint smile. "I'm managing." We sat. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were insurance forms, neatly typed and highlighted where he wanted my signature. I pretended to scan them, but my mind was elsewhere. Watching him. Studying the way his eyes darted, the way he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And then, almost casually, I asked, "Mark, why did David warn me not to trust you?" His pen froze midair. Slowly, he looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" I leaned forward, my voice shaking. "I got a message at the funeral. From David. He said he was alive. He said not to trust you." Mark's face went pale, then hardened. He leaned in close, his voice low and sharp. "You should have stayed out of this, Elena." My stomach dropped. It was true. He wasn't even denying it. Before I could react, the cafe doors swung open. Officers stormed in, surrounding the table. "Mark Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice." Mark's face twisted with rage as he was yanked from his chair, handcuffs snapping around his wrists. He turned toward me, spitting venom with his words. "You think you've won, Elena? This isn't over." But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since David's message appeared. Relief. The trial that followed was grueling. Day after day, I sat in the courtroom as the recordings played, as the evidence was laid bare for all to see. The jury listened to Mark's voice plotting my death, to the business partner laying out their fraudulent schemes. I watched as their faces shifted from confidence to fear to defeat. And when the verdict finally came, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Guilty on all counts. Mark and his partner were sentenced to decades in prison. Their empire of lies collapsed, exposed for everyone to see. But amidst the justice, there was heartbreak. Because despite everything, David never came back. Lawson's contacts later discovered what had happened. David had escaped after his staged accident, but he had been gravely injured. He went into hiding, trying to gather evidence to bring down Mark and his partner. It was during that time he sent me the message at the funeral, desperate to warn me. But his injuries worsened, and before he could return to me, his body gave out. He died alone, in a safe house, leaving behind only his warnings and the evidence that eventually saved my life. The day I finally stood over his real grave, the autumn wind rustling the leaves, I whispered through my tears. "You were right, David. I couldn't trust them. But I trusted you. And you saved me." I laid a single white rose on the stone, my heart heavy but full of gratitude. Because even in death, David had protected me. And though I would carry the scars of betrayal forever, I also carried his strength. In the months that followed, I started a foundation in David's name, dedicated to helping others who had been deceived, betrayed, or left behind by the people they trusted most. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave me purpose. And every time I stood in front of a group of survivors, telling them my story, I remembered the words that had started it all. "I'm still alive. Trust no one." Those words were more than a warning. They were a promise. That truth can survive even in the darkest of places. That justice can rise, no matter how deep it's buried. And that real love doesn't end, even when life does. Would you have gone this far for the truth if you were Elena? Let me know in the comments. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Revenge with Nick, because more shocking true life inspired stories are on the way.